So when you start talking about different types of application paradigms, right? So, this is a new paradigm of crop nutrition webinar series. And so wouldn't be complete unless we started to talk about, you know, what are the differences between what we're doing at Apical and others regenerative agronomists and agronomy companies are doing, across the country and around the world versus what was being done back in the 1960s, 1970s, and so on. And so nowadays, you have, your soil mineral assessment or your soil health assessment. You might have, either like a soil food web test or, POC, like I keep talking about, or some other, Solvita test is another one, or Haney test that looks at the way the carbon is cycling throughout your microbial biosphere. When you start to look at these a little bit differently, oftentimes you have growers that are don't even know what biology is, don't even know what carbon is, don't understand what soluble carbon is and carbon cycling. It's hard for them to wrap their heads around why, high fertilization rates, hybrid genetics, insecticides, and herbicides, there could be anything better, right? But when you actually show them that you can actually have higher levels of mineral nutrition, higher levels of crop production, lower levels of weeds in certain cases, and significantly decrease crop input production budgets through allelopathy and biocontrols, you'll find that there's oftentimes when growers get that, even though if they've been in the chemical paradigm for 30 or 50 or 60 years, they can wrap their head around it because oftentimes they were grown up on those sorts of methods when they were, extremely young. And they say, oh, well, this is the way things were back when I was even younger, that sort of thing. And so, in leaf analysis, there's a big difference now between what we're doing in Apical versus what, your standard tissue lab and growers that are doing a tissue test once a year. I mean, it's a huge difference, right? So, we're testing for it 4 or 5 times a year, sometimes up to 7 or 8 in certain crops. We're looking at biweekly NPK and mineral balance, within the plants. We're looking at sugars, nitrogen cycling, gas, and conductivity. There's some elements of plant stress tolerance that are built into our method, and we'll go deeper into that as we get more in through the webinar series. And then last but not least, we're utilizing allelopathy and biocontrols based on those results. In other words, certain quantitative data sets are inferring other qualitative data sets that are saying, okay, well, yeah, we're probably going to be able to safely say, yeah, these plants are extremely under stress. We need to make sure that we're preventative with our IPM programs, right? Because everybody knows that stress plants are, magnets for insects and disease. Versus the 1970s where, annual NPK, just some micros, maybe your insecticides and herbicides, right? And this is going to be based off of your leaf analysis. And, not saying that one was bad or the other, but ultimately, things evolve, right? We used to use rotary telephones and now we use, a smartphone that goes up and down the highway with, doing all sorts of functions. So, the SAP analysis and integrated with precision multi-method soil analysis, you start to get a much clearer picture and you start to eliminate certain things from your blind spot. So when we start to talk about, how do we connect crop inputs to analysis methods, there's, there's always a certain, voice within the crowd that says, well, why do we need any of this stuff? Right. So, we've got, right. We're good. We got our phos acid and, we've got our 32 solution, maybe some urea, we got some, all kinds of KOH or what have you. What do we need all this organic stuff, or why should we bother with a 10-0-0 or what have you? And these are the reasons, right? So, labor costs, fertilizer costs, international competition, resistant weeds, increasing pest problems, decreasing soil health, and declining productivity on a range of crops. These are pretty common. There's might be some folks that would say, well, there's a lot larger production, through hydrogenetics or through genetic modification. And I would say potentially, but at the same time, there's now becoming so many case studies and anecdotes and, real hardcore scientific field trials that are being done where regenerative programs are either, on par or outperforming their conventional counterparts. That said, we don't see a lot of resistant weeds in organic systems. Similarly, a lot of the organic farmers that I know have known over the years, they don't have a ton of pest problems. A lot of people, ask me, well, why is that? And it's not to say that organic growers don't have pest problems, because they do. But on the whole, there's just typically less chemical need on an organic system. And I felt for a long time about this, and ultimately, the answer is in the word, right? Organic means with carbon, right? When you have carbon in the soil environment and carbon fertilization is included knowingly or unknowingly, you're going to automatically have a much more resilient system to stress and all that brings. So, the organic system and the organic methods were developed, as originally in the 50s and 60s from traditional methods, and tried to solidify traditional farming practices into the modern age. That said, when we had the USDA standards, there has been some degree of co-opting. And that is where a lot of this regenerative agriculture talk comes in now. And as we move forward through the regenerative sort of revolution, there's some real great opportunities to sort of merge the organic norms with the regenerative technologies that are helping the conventional farms to shift more, not necessarily organically, but some degree of regenerative or some endosofter. Okay, so we're going to be jumping into some different types of crop inputs here in a minute, but I want to kind of get this out of the way, that it doesn't mean that, if we're dealing with different inputs, it doesn't mean that they're going to be that much different than what your conventional farmers are typically used to doing. So a lot of what the Apical Toolkit has been doing for the last 10 years is helping growers to transition to organic farms and, from conventional cropping systems. And so in order to do that, what we needed inputs that had the organic ethics, the carbon-based fertilization, baked into the system, that could also fit within the conventional input paradigm, right? Carbon is king. Thanks again very much, and look forward to seeing you all next week. Take care.